Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Hey, and welcome to Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Williamson, president of Personal Edge Fitness. Thank you so much for listening today. I want to speak to you today about one of my favorite topics, something I got involved in. I think all of us have been involved in at some point in time of our lives. Now, of course, fitness. I mean, a lot of us have done some physical education or PE. As a matter of fact, I was such a big fan of PE. That's part of the reason why we named the business Personal Edge. And I think physical education should always be a large part of all of our lives. There's a lot of aspects from the old PE classes that's still good today. I'm not sure that some of the picking people last, or maybe the wedges that went on in the locker room, what have you, a big part of it. But there are several aspects of playing games, general exercise, fitness, calisthenics, and one of my most favorite, and the one we're talking about today, which is stretching. I'm going to give you some information about it today, some stuff that you may not know that may be new to you. Pretty much the latest information on stretching, how to do it, why to do it, when not to do it. Stretching, or actually flexibility, basically it's a measurement of the space between two joints, the tissue between two joints, warming it up, and how pliable that tissue is. Let's put it that way. So usually when we're stretching, we're talking about muscles. You've got tendons and stuff that can get stretched. It's not something we practice or we try to do. That's usually a bad thing. Flexibility deals mostly with the muscles themselves, and it's something that a lot of people for the longest time used to use, believe it or not, in the wrong way. I don't think any of us started, when we were kids, didn't start some sort of a PE program or athletics without stretching prior to. In fact, my producer, Pablo, and I were talking earlier about stretching. He's somebody that, believe it or not, is still pretty flexible today, you would even say, right?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed stretching, but I mean, I'm not in the shape I'd like to be in, but I do enjoy the stretching part.
Well, we and I were talking about this earlier, and he noticed it when he was a kid. You were telling me earlier about how much the coaches were impressed with your flexibility and what have you. You also said a comment that you wouldn't go on the field. You weren't allowed to play.
Yeah, I was a baseball player, and our coaches always dictated you had to be stretched out before you ever picked up a bat, a ball, set foot on the field to start any kind of practice. Exactly.
Like I said earlier, I don't know if any of us that have been involved in some sort of athletics when we were younger that didn't have that rule, but Pablo got something to tell you that actually we were doing that wrong. And of course, like everything in fitness and nutrition, we're always learning changes to many of the things we do. But even though it may have been wrong, I would not tell you to stop. Now, I'll explain what I'm talking about here. Years ago, I had the opportunity going to the American College of Sport Medicine, their annual summit, their big get-together of all the members of ACSM. ACSM, American College of Sport Medicine, is the defining body, pretty much the gold standard of not only certifications in fitness and wellness, but they actually wrote the book, literally, on fitness testing, fitness evaluation. Been around for a good 40 years plus. They write a book that is kind of our Bible. If you've gotten a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or even PhD in this field, you've used some of the textbooks when it comes to exercise testing, and prescription was written by American College of Sport Medicine, and that's why I happen to have my certifications through this particular agency. I went to their national summit, which I try to attend every year when possible, and I heard a man speak, happened to be talking about flexibility and stretching. And I'll tell you why I have a major interest in that. My background, as I've said earlier, that I was a pole vaulter. Pole vaulting was, believe it or not, my third sport that I became interested in as a kid. My second was actually diving. I enjoyed springboard diving thoroughly, but we only had a summer team. We didn't have kind of a year-round program. And before that, I'd gotten into tumbling at an early age and actually did gymnastics for around 30 years. I taught for 20 years. Something I love. The reason that I had to go to pole vaulting and diving and gymnastics, so we didn't have any teams. We didn't get any kind of competition for those disciplines. And the reason I was a good pole vaulter was because I had such a great gymnastics background. I have a major passion for flexibility, for stretching, and what have you, because of being involved in those disciplines. But so, of course, I wanted to go hear this particular individual speak about stretching and some new research that he'd found about stretching. For those of you that are alumni with us, you know what that sound is. Keep up with your hydration. Keep up with drinking. That's me taking in some water. I am now at about 74 ounces, so I hope you're keeping up. Every time you hear that sound, you got to take a drink of your water. Back to that talk I went to, there's the new advancements in stretching is provided by a man by the name of Dr. Michael Bracco. Now, Mike Bracco, he's actually now the past president of ACSM, but at the time he was a noted exercise physiologist, one of the top in the world for that matter. And Dr. Bracco, I thought this was kind of interesting about his background. As I always read the synopsis before I go into the talk, but he's actually the chief exercise physiologist at the Canadian Institute for Hockey Research. Now, this is a huge thing. Now, me being from South Alabama, the Canadian Institute of Hockey never really came across my mind. I was more tuned into Dr. Kenneth Cooper's facility in Dallas, Texas. But evidently, the Canadian Institute of Hockey is where quite a bit of fitness research comes out of, and Dr. Bracco is one of the reasons for that. But he gave a talk, and he gave a talk on flexibility, and he gave a talk on stretching, which I thought, of course, I've been involved in gymnastics for 20 years, and at that time, I'd been a trainer for a good 10 years or so. I'd already completed my master's degree. Figured, wow, I probably know everything. I'd probably get up there and teach this thing, but I might as well go in and listen to it. Came in and blew my mind. And the reason being is that he told me something that was very interesting. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about the fact that we were doing it wrong. Through his research, we found out that stretching prior to exercise or prior to a sport, believe it or not, they've shown possibly increases injury. Now, the whole reason we're doing this is we were doing it to prevent injury. And a lot of us looked at it as this was our quote-unquote warm-up. We were to stretch before we played, stretch before we did anything, and that's the way to prevent injury. Well, there's a simple reason if you think about it. And as he started to talk, it made a lot of sense. And as I tell you this, I'm sure that you'll understand why I think it's actually a very simple concept. It makes a lot of sense. If you do any kind of exercise, you do any kind of working out or whatever, I'm sure that at some point in time in your life, either you're involved in a fitness routine now, or maybe you were involved in sports at a younger age or what have you, and you remember being sore. You remember doing things to the point where a muscle burned. If you're lifting a weight and you're planning on doing 15 repetitions, between 12 and 15, you start to feel that burn. Yes, your body tearing muscle fibers is what's happening. They're tearing muscle fibers, and they're releasing something that many of us know about. It's called lactic acid. Now, a lot of people think that lactic acid is why you're sore the next day. That has absolutely nothing to do with it. Lactic acid is a byproduct being released from that muscle that you're tearing that is made to burn you. It is doing that on purpose. That's what the good Lord provided it for a way for us to tell you, hey, Susie, stop that. If you don't stop that, you're going to rip that muscle in half. And I'm going to burn you, and I'm going to burn you more and more and more until you cut that out. And that's the whole reason that lactic acid is there. But if you think about it, that feeling you get when you're straining on a bicep curl or on a bench press or even in a squat and that burn that you feel or what have you, well, lactic acid, once it gets into the system, once you stop, it dissipates within 25 to 30 seconds. So that's why a lot of people do an exercise and they'll wait 25 to 30 seconds and repeat the exercise. When we're doing a 30-minute session, one of my trainers will take somebody and do an exercise, then they'll go do a completely different body part during that same time. So they don't have to stop. But what they're doing is they're waiting for that 30-second time for that lactic acid to dissipate so that you can attack the muscle again. And that's why they actually go between two different exercises and make the best use of our time. Now, why am I bringing this up? I'm talking about lifting weights. I'm talking like lactic acid and what have you. Well, think about it. That burn when you lift to exhaustion, lift to completion, it's familiar. In fact, if you think about when you go to stretch and you go and stretch your hamstrings, you bend down and touch your toes, whatever, you feel a sensation that says, okay, stop. If you notice it, it's the same burn. It's the exact same feeling. And if you don't think so, do a common stretch you've done before and push it to the point where you've had enough and see what kind of feeling you get. What makes you say stop, cut it out? Well, what Dr. Bracco proved in his studies was that burn that you're feeling is no different than the burn you're feeling from lifting weights. In other words, the only way you get that burn is by tearing muscle fiber. So if you're tearing muscle fiber prior to doing exercise where your goal is to tear muscle fiber, well, you're damaging the muscle prior to damaging the muscle. Now, I speak a lot about tearing muscle fibers, by the way, and we'll go off on this, but tearing muscle fibers actually is a good thing. We are breaking muscle tissue down. If any trainer, a physical therapist, occupational therapist, anybody that makes their living by doing exercises or having you conduct exercises, ever tells you that they're building something, well, not really. Not directly. Indirectly, yes. But actually, every single one of those people, me included, are tearing fibers. We're tearing things down. We're tearing muscle tissue down. The way you grow muscle, very simple. It's another podcast that I'm doing that talks about developing muscle. The way you grow muscle is tear a fiber. Once you tear a muscle fiber, your body uses nutrients. If you have enough calories, have enough protein, then your body will use those nutrients to build it back. Your body is the most intelligent machine that you've ever come across. We still don't understand everything about it, so it's an amazing thing. And it knows that, hey, you know what? Last time we had that muscle built up to a certain level. This time, we're going to build it a little stronger. Because evidently, it needs to be stronger because it couldn't handle what it handled last time. Think of muscle development like a hurricane hitting you. Now, we have a lot of those down in the Gulf Coast and what have you. Other people know tornadoes and what have you. If you have a hurricane hit and you've got a straw house, well, you're going to build it back, but you're probably going to build it out of wood this time. Hits again, you're going to build it out of brick. You're going to build it stronger and stronger. Your body works that same way. And that's why we tear muscle fibers. So I talk about that a lot. I want to make sure I clear up that that's actually a very good thing. But let's get back to it. What I was talking to about flexibility and stretching. You're tearing muscle fibers, which is released lactic acid and tells you to stop that stretch. So we found out from Dr. Bracco's talk that really we needed to be stretching, but not stretching beforehand. Now, the last thing I want you to come out of this and think is that, oh, you shouldn't stretch. Oh, gosh, nothing's further from the truth. It deals with when you should stretch. And not only is there a time capacity on far as when you should stretch, but there's ways to stretch. There's ways to go about starting a stretching routine or getting involved in a stretching routine. And it's something that everybody needs to do, no matter if you're an athlete, an average Joe, no matter your age, no matter any of it. And believe it or not, if you've been flexible before, you haven't been flexible before, you've never been flexible in your life, you were able to do some things which you could at a younger age and now you can't or whatever, doesn't matter what the situation is, you can be flexible. You can increase your flexibility in any muscle at any time. It's very simple. And I'll tell you why that is. Dr. Kenneth Cooper, you hear me mention him quite often because he is my boyhood friend and idol and my hero in this business, proved years ago, in his first studies done back in 1969 when he started this, proving that we can regrow muscle at any age. And so if you can regrow muscle, you can break down muscle fibers and build it back, then you can break down muscle fibers when you're stretching and flexibility and build them back, and you can become more and more flexible. It's something that everybody knows we need to do, but very few people actually take the time to do. In fact, it is so important to us that we stretch every client in every single session. And it's something that we actually manually do. We can encourage our clients to do that. We can give them list upon list of flexibility exercise, and typically don't do that. And really, a lot of times we don't take that advice and do those things is because we don't understand quite the importance of it and what it actually does. Well, flexibility does, believe it or not, the stretching does prevent injury. It's just we shouldn't stretch before an exercise. We should stretch afterwards. But you do want to increase that range of motion between those joints. By doing that, we're going to have less of a tendency to pull a muscle, less of a tendency to step off a curb into a pothole and pull a hamstring. Believe it or not, there's something very interesting. I told you that we should stretch after exercise. We shouldn't stretch before exercise. Another surprising thing that most people don't know is that a strong muscle is a flexible muscle. Believe it or not, the third most flexible athlete behind a dancer and a gymnast, believe it or not, is a power lifter. Now, not bodybuilder, but a power lifter. Now, you think about this. These big fat guys that are in the Olympics that can lift all this incredible amount of weight. It's not unheard of to see one of those guys set a world record and then drop into a split. As funny as it sounds. Because, again, a strong muscle is a flexible muscle. I had a good friend of mine that was a power lifter. We were in our master's degree together, and that was one of his stupid bar tricks that he would do, introducing himself to women and what have you. They get into talks or whatever, and he bet them that he was more flexible than they are as far as touching his toes. And because he was a big guy, he was a power lifter, they thought for sure there's no way this guy could drop into a split or touch his toes or whatever. He got all kinds of phone numbers by just doing that simple little trick, as crazy as it sounds. But he was a power lifter. He was very strong. He knew that, strong muscle is a flexible muscle. For back to stretching, there's several different types of stretching. We've heard of a lot of these. I want to get into the descriptions of each one of these, the ones that we should do and some that we should stay away from. Now, I'm going to get a lot of flack about this by people calling in and have some different opinions about what I'm about to tell you. And by the way, if you're interested in calling into the show, we'd love to have your comments. We'd love to have your questions about any aspect of fitness and nutrition or lifestyle as far as that's concerned. You can reach us at our phone number, which is 251-278-EDGE. The phone won't be answered, but it's a voicemail. We check it like a bodily function. We love to have your comments there, or reach out to us via email at info@personaledgefitness.com. Contact us through our website, which is, again, personaledgefitness.com. We're on Facebook at Personal Edge Fitness, and our Twitter handle is Team PE. We love to have your comments. I'm afraid that I'm probably going to get my email box loaded up with all kinds of comments because I'm going to tell most people to stay away from ballistic stretching. This is something we've known for years. This is the old type of bending down, reaching for your toes and bouncing up and down, or sitting down and reaching for your toes, or doing any kind of stretch where you're doing a repetitive into a full stretch, out of the full stretch. That's what the bouncing up and down. There was something we did in grade school. I remember it was pea picking or chair. You know what I'm talking about? You familiar with that, Pablo? No. The legs are kind of straddled when you're standing up, and you're reaching in the front, in the middle, and in the back, and you're kind of bouncing when you're doing that. So we called it like picking peas or picking peanuts or something like that was what that was. That's a type of ballistic stretching. I was watching a show that's set in the 1950s, and it had a ladies' exercise class, and they were reaching out to each foot, and they were bouncing up and down. That's known as ballistic stretching. It's something I'd stay away from. The reason being is that you're pushing the muscle to full extension, and then popping out of it and pushing back into it again. And you're doing it rapidly. But by doing that, that's actually how you pull a muscle. So you think about it, one of the main reasons you pull a muscle is because you have a imbalance between the muscles. It's usually a quick burst. It's not a slow pull that happens. It's a quick burst that actually pulls the muscle. And ballistic stretching is a rapid kind of movement. It's one I'd stay away from. The one that we're more familiar with is bend down, get into a position, reach for a stretch, and hold it for a good, 20, 30 seconds, 35 seconds. Well, that's known as static stretching. Still, it's fantastic. It can be a little painful because what's going on there, when you actually bend into the stretch, your muscle could stretch further. It sounds kind of strange, but it could stretch further. The reason that it's not stretching further is remember that intelligent machine I told you, the most intelligent machine you've ever known, which is your body. It knows that you're pushing that muscle to its limit, and so it's going to fight you. So what's going to happen is as you go into that stretch, your muscle's going to contract. Let's say you're just reaching down, again, I keep saying touching your toes, but you're reaching down to stretch your hamstring. You reach down for your foot, and you start to feel a major pull and a major burn in that hamstring. What's happening is your body's actually contracting the muscle. It's fighting against you. It's fighting against you because it knows its limit. It knows at what point you're going to yank that muscle away from the bone. And so it's going to contract and fight you well before you've gone into a full stretch. And so that's what static stretching is about, taking that patient, sitting there through that little bit of that burn, and that's static stretching. If you come out of it and go back into it, sometimes you can go a little bit further. Something that's very popular now, mainly because of all the research that we've done, is what's called dynamic stretching. Now, this is what I've always said that a lot of the physical part of yoga thinks it is. And nothing against yoga. I think it's a fantastic modality, both physically and mentally. But dynamic stretching is the true physical part of that. It's movement-based stretching. Even though you're going into a stretch, but it's a much more fluid way of moving through it, stepping through and actually reaching for your toes, but swooping down and coming back up so that you're bending your back and arching your back. But you're just doing it briefly and you're passing through the difficult part of the stretch. You're not bouncing down to it like a ballistic. You're just slowly moving through it, and you repeat that. Now, that's a safe way of doing what we thought we were doing with ballistic stretching. There's a class that we teach here at Personal Edge Fitness. We do dynamic stretching classes 4 days a week, and you'll see people actually out moving around as they're doing the stretching. They're also increasing blood flow, so they're creating a warm situation around that muscle. And if you warm up the muscle, well, y'all know as well as I do, it becomes a bit more pliable. The last type of modality or type of stretching is my favorite. It's one that we use with all of our clients at the end of every single session, and it's called PNF stretching. Now watch this. This is fantastic. Hang on a second. I'm going to need some water. Got to hydrate on this one. I'm getting up to 80 ounces. Hope you're keeping up. This last type of stretching is known as PNF stretching. I was involved in musical theater when I was a kid. I was actually in version of Mary Poppins, so I know supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. I know some other big words, and the other ones I know are PNF, which is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. Come on, kids. Let's all say it together. Proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation.
We don't need that kind of language on this podcast, dude.
I have to do it slowly. I'm going to get it wrong. But proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. What that is, what PNF stretching is taking that muscle to that point when the stretch reflex kicks in. As an exercise physiologist, I know the muscle can go farther than that. And I know the body's fighting me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to scramble the brain of that muscle. So now believe me, you can't fool your body all the time, but you can fool it a little bit briefly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put somebody into a stretch, and then I'm going to have them contract that muscle. Now what's going to happen is, let's say that I have somebody laying on one of our mat tables. I've got their leg up in the air, one leg on the mat. They're laying on their back. One leg is up in the air. I'm actually holding that leg by the ankle, and they push back against me. Now I don't let the leg move. I hold it steady. I'm doing what's called an isometric exercise. They're actually pushing and contracting that muscle. When I tell them to relax, they're pushing for about 10, 15, 20 seconds. But when I tell them to relax, the muscle relaxes completely because it's ready to take a rest. And that means that the brain of the stretch reflex is actually scrambled a bit for just a few seconds. So when the muscle relaxes, I relax briefly, and then all of a sudden I'll start to push back against it. I'll take it till its full extension. What will usually happen, I'll end up getting 2, 3, 4, depending on how flexible the person is, 5 inches more out of that stretch. And at first, it does not hurt at all. I will push it to that point. I'll hold it steady. The client feels like I'm continuing to push. I'm not. I'm holding it in one spot. But all of a sudden, that stretch reflex wakes up and it starts to fight back and fight back hard. But what has happened already is I've gained some flexibility. I've taught the muscle that it can move farther. We've torn some muscle fibers, what have you, yes, but we've made it more flexible. We've taught it that it can go further. And that can be done because of what Dr. Cooper started proving in 1969 and has repeated the study over and over and over again, that we can regrow muscle at any age. Therefore, you can become more flexible no matter what age you are. No matter what, folks, if it's dynamic, if it's static, stay away from ballistic, or it's PNF, if you're doing partner stretching, what have you. It's something that you ought to have as part of your fitness routine. And if you're not doing fitness, it's something you ought to have on your daily routine. Now, Pablo, you told me that you still...
Yeah, I enjoy it. It just feels good.
I hear you. Exactly. Remember, I told you earlier in an earlier podcast, I'm the kid that was, why, Mrs. Johnson? Why me? Why? I'm always going to know why. Why does it make you feel better? Well, it makes your body more efficient. Therefore, the blood flow to those muscles is much easier. Oxygen equals energy, so you've got oxygenated blood going to those muscles. It's going to make you feel better. Literally, it's going to make you feel better. It's going to open up that joint, which is not going to make you feel so tight, literally, so bound up, so uncomfortable for that matter. Best way to get involved with it, start slow, folks. Like everything else in fitness, start slow and go easy with it. First and foremost, warm up. A warm-up is not stretching. Warm-up means increasing circulation. So take a walk. Wake up, move around. So many people that have back trouble especially wake up and tell me, gosh, I get up in the morning, it hurts like anything, but after I move around a while, everything feels better. Of course it does. You've got blood flow there. You've got warming up going on. So get up, move a little bit. If you're in a fitness facility, get on a cardio piece. Go for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, whatever. Raise that heart rate a little bit until you feel a little bit warm. And then go slow on your stretching. Start easy. Start with smaller muscle groups. Stretch those first. And be careful when you're stretching not to use a small muscle group to stretch, especially a cold, large muscle group. Now, what I mean by that, I keep talking about touching your toes. That's a common stretch a lot of people do. If you're just doing a simple overhead, or leaning over towards your toes and hanging a bit, that's not as dangerous as trying to force that stretch, because what you're doing is you're using a small lower back muscle to stretch a large hamstring muscle. So be careful. You want to try to set yourself up so that you're stretching big muscles without involving the small muscles as much as possible. The best thing I say you ought to do on that, remember my wife tells me that all the time, seek professional help. Somebody that has a degree in exercise science, exercise physiology, an athletic trainer can show you the proper way to stretch or can actually do some of the stretching for you. So, and patience. Patience is a virtue on this, especially in static stretching, especially in PNF stretching. Believe it or not, I can take somebody that's extremely cold, even with a weak hamstring. I can hold them in a stretch with that stretch reflex fighting me. If we had unlimited amount of time, if we had hours, I can take most any person and take their leg over their head. Simple. What will happen is that stretch reflex will tighten up and then it will relax. Muscle is a very soft tissue. It will stretch. It's pliable. It's like a rubber band. You just got to be patient with it. So if you're patient during your static stretching, you're not going to hurt yourself. Plus, you're going to increase your flexibility. As Pablo said a minute ago, you're going to feel a heck of a lot better. Yeah. Hey, listen, thank you so much for listening to us today. I appreciate you tuning in. I'm Garrett Williamson. This is the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. Remember to stay hydrated.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.